Jake Morrison pulled his thick coat tighter around his body as he stepped out into the howling wind. Snow hit his face like tiny needles, and he had to squint to see more than a few feet ahead. The storm had been going for 3 days now, and it showed no signs of stopping. He had never seen anything like it in his 5 years working on Kepler-442b. The mining colony was small, with only 43 people living and working there. Jake was the main engineer who kept all the machines running. The atmospheric processors that made the air breathable, the heating systems that kept everyone alive, and the power generators that ran everything. They were all his responsibility. When something broke during a storm like this, he was the one who had to go out and fix it. His boots crunched through snow that came up to his knees. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked him over twice as he made his way to the perimeter generators. These machines created a protective field around the colony that kept out the worst of the planet's harsh weather. If they failed during this storm, everyone would freeze to death within hours. The first generator was working fine, humming quietly under its protective cover. Jake checked the power readings on his handheld device and nodded with satisfaction. The second generator was also running well. But when he reached the third generator, something was wrong. The power output was down by 30%, and the machine was making a strange grinding noise. Jake opened the access panel and shone his flashlight inside. Ice had built up around the main cooling vents, blocking the airflow. If he did not clear it soon, the generator would overheat and shut down. He pulled out his tools and started chipping away at the ice, his fingers already going numb, despite his thick gloves. As he worked, he thought he heard something over the howling wind. It sounded almost like crying, but that was impossible. No one else would be crazy enough to be outside in this weather. He paused and listened carefully. There it was again, a soft, sad sound that definitely was not the wind. Jake finished clearing the ice from the generator and closed the access panel. The machine's power output returned to normal, and the grinding noise stopped. But he could still hear that crying sound. It seemed to be coming from behind the supply depot, about 50 yards away. He should have gone straight back to the main building where it was warm and safe. That would have been the smart thing to do. But Jake had always been the kind of person who could not ignore someone in trouble. He trudged through the deep snow toward the sound, his flashlight dancing wildly in the wind. Behind a large metal crate, Jake found something that made him stop and stare. Huddled in the snow was a small figure, no bigger than a human child. But this was definitely not human. Its skin looked like it was made of pale blue crystal, and it seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. The creature had large, golden eyes that looked up at him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. The little being was shivering violently, and Jake could see that its crystal skin was turning darker blue by the minute. Whatever this creature was, it was clearly dying from the cold. Jake had no idea where it had come from or how it had gotten here, but none of that mattered right now. Without thinking about the consequences, Jake pulled off his heavy thermal coat. The freezing air hit him immediately, making him gasp. His breath came out in white clouds, and he could already feel the deadly cold starting to seep through his lighter clothing. But the small alien needed the coat more than he did. Jake wrapped his coat around the shivering creature, being careful not to move too quickly and scare it. The moment the warm fabric touched its skin, the alien's color began to change back from dark blue to its natural pale crystal hue. The golden eyes looked up at Jake with what he could only describe as gratitude. The alien was much lighter than a human child would be, and Jake easily lifted it in his arms. He had to get both of them to shelter quickly, or they would both freeze to death. The maintenance shed where he kept his tools was the closest building, only about 100 yards away. But in this storm, with the wind and snow, It might as well have been 100 miles. Jake started walking, holding the alien close to his chest to share what little body heat he had left. Each step was a struggle against the wind, and the snow kept getting deeper. His teeth were chattering so hard he thought they might break, and he could no longer feel his hands or feet. The cold was like a living thing, trying to crawl inside his bones and stop his heart. The alien in his arms had stopped shivering, which Jake knew was not a good sign. He could feel its small body getting warmer from his coat, but he was getting colder by the second. His vision started to blur, and he stumbled several times. Each time he fell, he made sure to land on his back so the alien would not hit the ground. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Jake saw the dim outline of his maintenance shed through the swirling snow. He used the last of his strength to reach the door and fumble with the lock. His fingers were so numb he could barely work the keypad, but eventually the door clicked open. Inside the shed, Jake turned on the heating units and collapsed onto a pile of old blankets he kept there for emergencies. The alien was still wrapped in his coat, and its crystal skin was now glowing with a soft, steady light. Jake's whole body was shaking from the cold, but he felt a strange sense of peace. He had saved this little creature's life, even if it might have cost him his own. As warmth slowly returned to the shed, Jake looked down at the alien child and wondered what would happen next. He had just made first contact with an unknown species, and he had done it by giving away the one thing keeping him alive in this frozen wasteland. But looking into those grateful golden eyes, Jake knew he would make the same choice again. The heating units in the maintenance shed hummed quietly as Jake slowly warmed up. His fingers and toes burned as feeling returned to them, but he was alive. More importantly, so was the small alien creature wrapped in his thermal coat. The little being's crystal skin now glowed with a soft, steady light that filled the shed with a gentle blue radiance. Jake sat up carefully, not wanting to startle his unexpected guest. The alien was awake, those large golden eyes watching him with curiosity rather than fear. It was definitely a child, probably no more than 4 feet tall, even if it stood up. Its body was thin and delicate, with limbs that seemed almost too fragile for this harsh world. The creature made a soft sound, almost like music. Jake realized it was trying to communicate with him. He pointed to himself and said slowly, "Jake." Then he pointed to the alien and raised his eyebrows in a questioning look. The little being seemed to understand. It touched its own chest and made a sound that Jake thought might be Zira. He repeated the name, and the alien's skin grew brighter. For a moment, which Jake took as a good sign, Jake looked around the shed for something they could use to communicate better. He found a piece of metal that had frost on it and used his finger to draw a simple picture of a human stick figure. Then he handed the metal to Zira and watched as the alien carefully drew its own stick figure next to his. This one had longer arms and a different body shape. Over the next hour, they developed a basic way to talk to each other using drawings and gestures. Jake learned that Zira was not from this planet. The alien drew pictures of stars and a spaceship, then showed the ship crashing into the ground. Jake felt his heart sink as he realized what this meant. There were more aliens somewhere out in the storm, and they were probably freezing to death just like Zira had been. Zira drew more pictures, showing what looked like a family, bigger versions of herself and several smaller ones. The alien kept pointing toward the door and making urgent sounds. Jake understood that Zira wanted him to help find the others, but he also knew how dangerous it would be to go back out into the storm. As they continued to communicate, Jake noticed something strange happening to his body. For years, he had suffered from chronic pain in his back from an old mining accident. The pain was always there, making it hard to sleep and difficult to do his job. But now, sitting close to Zira, the pain was completely gone. It was as if the alien's presence was somehow healing him. Jake touched his back where the injury had been and felt no pain at all. He looked at Zira with wonder, and the alien seemed to understand his amazement. Zira reached out one delicate hand and touched Jake's shoulder. A warm, tingling sensation spread through his body, and Jake felt better than he had in years. But Jake knew they had bigger problems to solve. He tried to explain to Zira that he needed to contact the colony authorities about the crashed aliens. He drew pictures of more humans and pointed toward the main settlement. Zira became agitated, making sharp sounds and shaking her head violently. Through more drawings, Jake began to understand why Zira was so upset. The alien showed him pictures of other species they had encountered, some friendly, but others hostile. Apparently, not all aliens were welcomed peacefully when they made first contact. Some were captured, studied, or even killed. Zira was afraid that the human authorities would not be kind to her people. Jake felt torn between his duty to report the situation and his desire to help these creatures who were clearly in desperate need. The colony had strict rules about first contact with alien species. Any encounters had to be reported immediately, and the aliens would be quarantined while Earth Command decided what to do with them. This process could take weeks or even months, and Zira's people did not have that kind of time. He made a decision that went against everything he had been trained to do. Jake drew a picture of himself and Zira going out into the storm together to find the other aliens. He showed them bringing the others back to safety without involving the colony authorities. At least not yet. Zira's skin brightened considerably, and she made what Jake was sure were happy sounds. But Jake was worried about the practical problems they faced. His thermal coat was the only thing keeping Zira alive, which meant he would have to face the deadly cold with much less protection. He also had no idea how many aliens they were looking for, or how far they might be scattered across the frozen landscape. Jake gathered every piece of warm clothing and heating equipment he could find in the shed. He had several emergency heating pads, a few old jackets, and some thermal blankets. It was not much, but it might be enough to keep a few more aliens alive long enough to bring them to safety. He also realized that Zira might be the key to finding the others. When he drew a picture asking how they could locate the crashed aliens, Zira touched her head and then pointed in different directions around the shed. Jake understood that she could somehow sense where her people were, probably through some kind of natural ability her species possessed. Before they left the warmth of the shed, Jake tried one more time to convince Zira that they should get help from the colony. He drew pictures of many humans working together to save the aliens, but Zira remained firm in her refusal. She drew pictures of her people being taken away in cages, and Jake could see the fear in her golden eyes. Jake looked at his watch and realized they had been in the shed for almost 2 hours. Every minute they waited, more aliens might be dying in the cold. He made his choice. He would help Zira save her people, even if it meant risking his own life and his career. Sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. He bundled Zira up in his thermal coat again and gathered all the heating equipment he could carry. The storm was still raging outside, but it seemed slightly less intense than before. Jake hoped that meant it was finally starting to weaken. As they prepared to leave the safety of the shed, Jake looked down at the small alien who had already changed his life in ways he was still trying to understand. Zira looked back at him with trust and gratitude that made his chest feel tight with emotion. Whatever happened next, Jake knew he was about to embark on the most important mission of his life. Jake loaded his maintenance vehicle with every heating device he could find in the shed. The small electric cart was designed for moving tools and equipment around the colony, but today it would serve as a rescue vehicle. He packed heating pads, thermal blankets, emergency food rations, and his portable generator. Zira sat beside him, still wrapped in his thermal coat, her golden eyes scanning the white landscape ahead. The storm had weakened slightly, but visibility was still poor. Snow continued to fall heavily, and the wind cut through Jake's lighter jacket like a knife. He had given Zira his warmest coat, leaving himself with only a work jacket that offered little protection against the deadly cold. Already he could feel the freezing air seeping through the fabric, making his muscles tense up. Zira pointed toward the east, making soft musical sounds that Jake now understood meant they should go in that direction. She seemed to be using some kind of internal compass that could locate her people, even through the storm. Jake steered the vehicle carefully through the deep snow, following her guidance. They had been driving for about 20 minutes when Zira suddenly became excited, pointing toward a cluster of rocks about 100 yards away. Jake stopped the vehicle and grabbed a heating pad and thermal blanket. Together, they trudged through the snow toward the rocks. Behind the largest boulder, they found their first survivor. It was an adult alien, much larger than Zira, but with the same crystal skin and golden eyes. This one's skin had turned almost black from the cold, and it was barely moving. Jake immediately wrapped the heating pad around the alien's body and covered it with a thermal blanket. Within minutes, the creature's skin began to lighten, and its eyes focused on Jake with amazement. The adult alien made deep, resonant sounds to Zira, who responded with her own musical tones. Jake understood they were talking about him, probably trying to figure out why a human was helping them. The adult alien looked at Jake with what seemed like disbelief, then reached out one long, delicate finger to touch his face. Jake felt the same warm, healing sensation he had experienced with Zira. They helped the adult alien into the vehicle, and Zira pointed in a new direction. Jake drove carefully across the rough terrain, his teeth chattering from the cold. His hands were getting numb again, making it hard to steer properly. But he pushed forward, determined to save as many of these creatures as possible. The second location Zira led them to was a small valley where they found 3 more aliens huddled together under what looked like part of their crashed spaceship. 2 were adults, and 1 was another child, even smaller than Zira. All 3 were in bad condition, their crystal skin dark, and their movements slow. Jake distributed more heating pads and blankets, watching with relief as the aliens began to recover. But he was running out of supplies, and Zira was indicating that there were still more survivors scattered across the area. Jake realized he would have to give up more of his own clothing to keep the aliens warm. Without hesitation, he pulled off his work jacket and wrapped it around the smallest alien child. The freezing air hit his body like a physical blow, and he gasped from the shock. Now he was wearing only a thin shirt and work pants in sub-zero temperatures. His survival time was measured in minutes rather than hours. The adult aliens seemed to understand what Jake was sacrificing for them. They made urgent sounds and tried to give him back some of the blankets, but Jake refused. These creatures would die without protection from the cold, while he might be able to survive long enough to get everyone to safety. They loaded the 3 new survivors into the vehicle, which was now getting crowded. Jake's portable generator was working hard to power all the heating pads, and he was worried about the battery life. They needed to find the remaining aliens quickly and get everyone back to his maintenance shed. Zira pointed toward the north, where she sensed more of her people. Jake drove in that direction, his whole body shaking from the cold. Ice was forming on his eyebrows and in his hair. He could no longer feel his fingers or toes, and his thoughts were becoming fuzzy from hypothermia. At the 4th location, they found 2 more adult aliens who had taken shelter in a small cave. These were in better condition than the others, having found some protection from the wind, but they were still dangerously cold and would not have survived much longer. Jake gave them his work gloves and wool hat, leaving his hands and head completely exposed to the freezing air. The adult aliens looked at him with expressions that clearly showed they understood he was risking his life for theirs. One of them, who seemed to be older than the others, made deep, solemn sounds while touching Jake's shoulder. By now, Jake could barely think straight. His body was shutting down from the extreme cold, and he was having trouble controlling the vehicle. But Zira indicated there were still more survivors to find. Jake forced himself to keep going, drawing on reserves of strength he did not know he had. The fifth group they found included 4 more aliens, 2 adults and 2 children, who had been trapped under a piece of metal from their crashed ship. Jake and the healthier adult aliens worked together to free them, though Jake's numb fingers made him clumsy. He distributed his remaining heating equipment, including the emergency thermal underwear he had been saving for himself. Now Jake was wearing only his basic shirt and pants in temperatures that could kill a human in minutes. His lips were blue, his skin was gray, and he was having trouble staying conscious. But when he looked at the grateful faces of the aliens he had saved, he felt a strange warmth inside that had nothing to do with body temperature. Zira seemed to sense that Jake was in serious danger. She pressed herself against him, sharing what warmth she could. The other adult aliens also crowded around him, using their own recovering body heat to keep him alive. Jake realized that these creatures he had saved were now trying to save him in return. The vehicle was now packed with 12 aliens, all of them recovering thanks to Jake's heating equipment and clothing. But the battery on the portable generator was running low, and Jake was barely able to drive. They needed to get back to the maintenance shed quickly, or everyone would freeze when the heating pads stopped working. Jake used the last of his strength to steer the overloaded vehicle back toward the colony. The aliens all stayed pressed close together, sharing warmth and trying to keep Jake conscious. Zira never left his side, her small hands holding his frozen fingers as if she could transfer life back into them. When they finally reached the maintenance shed, Jake collapsed as soon as he stopped the vehicle. The adult aliens carried him inside, while Zira ran ahead to turn on all the heating units. As warmth filled the small building, Jake felt consciousness slipping away, but he had done it. He had saved 12 alien lives, even if it had nearly cost him his own. Jake woke up surrounded by warmth and soft musical sounds. His eyes opened slowly to find himself covered in thermal blankets, with several of the adult aliens sitting around him making gentle humming noises. Zira was curled up next to him, her crystal skin glowing softly and radiating heat like a living heater. Jake realized the aliens were using their natural abilities to keep him alive. The maintenance shed had been transformed. The aliens had somehow modified the heating system to work more efficiently, and the whole space felt warmer than it ever had before. Jake tried to sit up, but his body felt weak and shaky. One of the adult aliens, the older one who had touched his shoulder earlier, gently pushed him back down and made soothing sounds. Through gestures and simple drawings, Jake learned that this alien was named Keth and seemed to be a leader among the group. Keth showed Jake that they had been taking care of him for several hours, using their own body heat and some kind of natural healing ability to treat his frostbite and hypothermia. Jake looked at his hands and was amazed to see that they looked normal. The gray, frozen skin had returned to its natural color, and he could move his fingers without pain. When he touched his face, he found that his frostbitten cheeks and nose had also healed completely. These aliens had somehow repaired the damage that should have left him permanently injured or even dead. Suddenly, the door to the shed burst open, and Colony Administrator Lisa Park stepped inside with 3 security guards. Jake's heart sank as he realized his secret was out. Someone must have noticed his absence or seen the overloaded maintenance vehicle. Lisa stopped short when she saw the 12 aliens gathered in the shed. Her hand moved toward the communication device on her belt, probably to call for backup. But before she could speak, something unexpected happened. Keth stood up slowly and walked toward Lisa with his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. The aliens. Skin began to glow brighter, and Jake could see that Lisa and her guards were affected by whatever energy the alien was producing. Their aggressive postures relaxed, and their expressions changed from suspicion to wonder. Keth began to communicate with Lisa, using the same drawing method he had used with Jake. Within minutes, it became clear that these aliens were not a threat. They were refugees who had been traveling through space for years, looking for a safe place to live after their home planet was destroyed. Jake struggled to his feet, still weak, but determined to explain what had happened. He told Lisa about finding Zira in the storm, about the rescue mission, and about how the aliens had saved his life in return. Lisa listened with growing amazement as she realized that Jake had made peaceful first contact with not just one alien species, but with a whole family group of survivors. As if to demonstrate their peaceful intentions, the aliens began showing Lisa and the guards their abilities. They could generate bioelectric energy that powered human technology more efficiently than the colony's fusion generators. They could process minerals and ores in ways that humans could not, separating valuable materials from rock, using only their natural biological functions. One of the younger adults, who Jake learned was named Vex, touched the shed's power control panel with one finger. Immediately, the lights became brighter and steadier. The heating system began running more smoothly, and Jake's portable generator showed a full charge, even though it should have been dead. Keth drew pictures, showing how his people had heard stories about humans from other alien species they had encountered during their long journey. These stories spoke of human kindness and willingness to help others, even strangers from different worlds. The aliens had been specifically looking for human colonies because they believed humans would give them a chance at a new life. Lisa looked at Jake with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. What he had done was completely against protocol, but it had also achieved something remarkable. Instead of a first contact situation that required military intervention and months of careful negotiation, they had a group of friendly aliens who wanted to help and contribute to the colony. The security guards, who had initially been ready to treat the aliens as potential threats, were now fascinated by their abilities. One guard, a young man named Paul, allowed Vex to touch his injured wrist. The alien's bioelectric field somehow accelerated the healing process, and Paul's sprained wrist was completely better within minutes. Jake explained to Lisa that the alien's ship had crashed during the storm and was probably buried under tons of snow. They had nowhere else to go and no way to contact their own people. If the colony rejected them, they would die on this frozen planet. Zira, who had been staying close to Jake's side, approached Lisa with one of Jake's drawings. It showed humans and aliens working together, sharing their different abilities to make life better for everyone. The little alien looked up at Lisa with those large golden eyes and made soft, pleading sounds. Lisa made a decision that would change the course of the colony's future. Instead of following the standard first contact protocols, she chose to treat the aliens as refugees in need of help. She contacted the main settlement and requested medical supplies, food, and temporary housing materials, but she did not mention the aliens to Earth Command. Over the next few hours, other colonists began arriving at the maintenance shed. Word had spread that something important was happening, and people were curious. Jake was worried about how the colonists would react to the aliens, but his fears proved unfounded. The colonists were amazed by the aliens' abilities and touched by their story. Dr. Susan Moore, the colony's chief medical officer, was particularly interested in the aliens' healing abilities. She discovered that their bioelectric fields could accelerate human tissue repair and even cure some chronic conditions. Jake's old back injury, which had bothered him for years, was completely gone. Dr. Moore examined him and found that the damaged tissue in his spine had somehow regenerated. This was medical technology, far beyond anything humans possessed. As the day progressed, it became clear that the aliens could offer the colony much more than just their gratitude. Their mineral processing abilities could make the mining operation far more efficient and profitable. Their bioelectric energy could power the entire settlement more reliably than the current fusion generators. But more importantly, their presence brought something to the colony that could not be measured in terms of efficiency or profit. They brought hope, wonder, and the knowledge that humans were not alone in the universe. They also brought proof that different species could work together peacefully and help each other survive. By evening, the maintenance shed had become the center of activity for the entire colony. Humans and aliens were working side by side, sharing knowledge and learning from each other. Jake watched this scene with deep satisfaction, knowing that his simple act of giving his coat to a freezing child had started something that would change both species forever. 6 months had passed since the storm that changed everything. Jake stood in what used to be his simple maintenance shed, but now served as the memorial of first contact. His old thermal coat hung in a place of honor behind protective glass, with a small plaque that read, "The coat that saved a child and united two worlds." The Kepler 442b colony had grown from a small mining outpost of 43 people to a thriving settlement of over 200 humans and 37 aliens. More Thylorians had been found in other crashed ships across the planet, all of them refugees from their destroyed homeworld. Each new group that arrived told the same story. They had heard about the place where humans and aliens lived together in peace. Jake now held the official title of Interspecies Relations Coordinator, though he still spent most of his time working with machines and solving practical problems. The difference was that now he worked alongside Thylorian partners who could do things with technology that humans had never imagined possible. Zira had grown taller over the past months, though she was still small compared to the adult Thylorians. She had learned to speak English fluently and served as a translator and cultural guide for new arrivals. Her favorite job was giving tours of the memorial shed to visitors from other colonies and telling the story of how one human's kindness had saved her life. The little alien girl never strayed far from Jake's side. She had appointed herself as his personal assistant and guardian, using her natural healing abilities to keep him healthy and help him recover from the hard physical work that his job required. The chronic pain in his back had never returned, and Jake felt stronger and healthier than he had in years. The partnership between humans and Thylorians had proven incredibly successful. The aliens' ability to generate bioelectric energy had eliminated the colony's dependence on fusion generators, which were expensive and difficult to maintain. Their mineral processing capabilities had increased mining efficiency by over 300%, making the colony one of the most profitable operations in human space. But the real breakthrough had come when the Thylorians shared their knowledge of bioelectric healing. Dr. Susan Moore had worked with Keth and other adult aliens to develop new medical treatments that could cure diseases and injuries that had previously been permanent. The colony's medical facility had become a research center that attracted doctors and scientists from across the galaxy. Lisa Park, who had been promoted to regional administrator for her successful handling of the first contact situation, received regular reports about other colonies requesting similar partnerships. Word of the Kepler 442b model had spread throughout human space, and dozens of alien species were asking for permission to establish refugee settlements near human colonies. The old fears about alien invasion or conquest had been replaced by excitement about the possibilities of interspecies cooperation. Each new alien species brought different abilities and knowledge that could benefit everyone. A galaxy was becoming a smaller, friendlier place. Jake often thought about how different things might have been if he had followed the rules that night during the storm. If he had contacted the authorities first, Zira and her people would have been taken away for quarantine and study. The opportunity for natural, peaceful cooperation would have been lost, replaced by suspicion and bureaucratic procedures that could have taken years to resolve. Instead, his simple human instinct to help someone in need had created a model for how different species could work together. The success of the colony had convinced Earth Command to revise their first contact protocols, giving local administrators more flexibility to handle alien encounters on a case-by-case basis. The memorial shed had become a pilgrimage site for both humans and aliens. Visitors came from hundreds of light years away to see the place where interspecies cooperation had begun. They listened to Zira tell the story of the storm, the rescue, and the months of building trust and friendship that followed. Jake's favorite part of the memorial was a wall covered with messages from other colonies and alien species. There were reports of successful partnerships, expressions of gratitude, and requests for advice on how to build similar relationships. Each message represented lives that had been saved or improved because of what had started in this small shed. Message that particularly moved Jake came from a colony on the outer rim where humans and insectoid aliens called the Zephyrians had formed a partnership. The Zephyrians had incredible engineering abilities and had helped the humans build cities that could withstand the planet's violent storms. In return, the humans had shared their agricultural knowledge, allowing the Zephyrians to grow food crops that their species had never been able to cultivate before. Another message came from a mixed settlement, where humans worked with plant-like aliens called the Verdani to terraform barren worlds. The Verdani could transform dead soil into fertile farmland within months, while humans provided the technology and organizational skills needed to manage large-scale ecological projects. As Jake read these messages, he realized that his decision to give his coat to a freezing alien child had set in motion changes that were affecting the entire galaxy. Species that had been isolated for millennia were now working together, sharing knowledge and resources that benefited everyone. On this particular evening, Jake stood in the memorial with Zira and Keth, watching the sunset through the transparent aluminum windows that had replaced the shed's original walls. The sky was painted in brilliant colors that seemed to make Zira's crystal skin glow even brighter than usual. A new transport ship was visible in the distance, coming in for a landing at the colony's expanded spaceport. Jake wondered what species would be aboard this time and what new possibilities their arrival would bring. Each ship brought new challenges, but also new opportunities for cooperation and friendship. Zira looked up at Jake and smiled, an expression she had learned from humans and perfected over the months. "Jake," she said in her musical voice, "do you ever regret giving me your coat that night?" Jake looked down at the young alien who had become like a daughter to him, then gazed out at the thriving colony where humans and aliens worked side by side in perfect harmony. Ships from dozens of worlds came and went daily, carrying refugees to safety and taking news of successful cooperation back to their home systems. "Never," Jake said, putting his hand on Zira's shoulder and feeling the familiar warm tingle of her bioelectric field. "That coat was the best investment I ever made." Outside, the new transport ship touched down, and Jake could see figures moving in the darkness. Another group of refugees, seeking the legendary human warmth that had become famous across the galaxy. Not just the warmth of heated shelters and thermal clothing, but the warmth of compassion, acceptance, and the willingness to help strangers in need. As they prepared to welcome the newcomers, Jake reflected on how one simple act of kindness had changed the course of galactic history. The coat that had saved one alien child had become the foundation for an alliance that now spanned hundreds of worlds and dozens of species. And it had all started with a human who could not bear to see another being suffer in the cold.